gospel. When God shows you something and God tells you something, that day will come.
For more than half a century, it was a secret Dottie Russell shared only with God. But then, the day she had seen so vividly finally arrived.
It really began in the fall of '99, after the prayer meeting.
We started to get phone calls, and people would say, "We've heard about your ministry there in Lynch, and we'd love to come and help. What can we do?"
The first year they were back in Kentucky was preparation. The second year they had 600 volunteers. The next year 1,200, the next year 2,000.
And I said, well, this has got to be God, because we didn't call anybody.
And it hasn't slowed down in 6 years.
God's hand is in it. He's drawn them here. Why else would all these people be coming here for us if He didn't have something, you know, this town's not done.
So the number of volunteers just multiplied. And immediately one of the huge questions was, where do we house them?
The Rileys' first thought was to purchase a 3-story, 12-room home that was vacant and in bankruptcy. The plan fell through.
So we prayed for that house, and it finally sold at auction. And I thought I'd missed God. So I went back to the Lord and I said, Lord, I want you to change my heart, because I don't want to ever pray outside your will.
It was the opening God had been waiting for, and it would change everything.
And the Lord told me that day, well, Lonnie, I don't want to give you that. I want to give you something else. When you seek the Lord, what you're looking for is for God to show up in response to that which you have asked. It could be a guy on the street, it can be a phone call, or it could be a person in the grocery store, it could be a person on horseback, it could be a person that stops you anywhere. I've been guilty of going from asking to doing and leaving out the seeking. And I miss so much of God. We can do some good things for God and miss God.
Still, in all genuine moves of God, there is a moment when the emphasis shifts from visitation to stewardship. When Lonnie heard the Arch Land Company was preparing to sell the town's historic hospital, he got on the phone with the company's vice president.
He said, well, why don't you buy it? That's called putting your faith where your mouth is, right? So I said, okay, I'll buy it. I said, how much you have to have for that building? He said, $85,000. I thought, whoa. I said, okay, I'll buy it. He said, well, how much money do you have? I said, oh, I don't have any money. I said, but my Heavenly Father's rich, and when He gets ready, He'll buy this building for me. He said, now I know you're a man of faith, but the best I can do is hold it for you for 30 days. I said to him, well, hang on to it. That should be sufficient time for my father to come up with that kind of money. So he could laugh, so we hung up the phone, and we asked the Lord to supply the need.
But God was already 2 steps ahead, and Lonnie knew it.
And so the vice president calls me back. He says, are you ready to close in that building in Lynch? I said, yes, sir, I'm ready when you are. He said, well, today's Tuesday. Next Tuesday will be your 30 days. Bring me a cashier's check for $85,000. I'll bring you the deed. We'll just exchange and it'll be yours. I said, okay, you get the deed ready, I'll be there. He said, well, how much money you got? I said, I got $25,000. He said, now you know you need $85,000. I said, yes, sir, but I don't need it today.
2 days later, at the 11th hour, God's perfect hour, a phone call. A gentleman informs Belinda that he will be forwarding some funds at God's request.
So I called her back on Friday. I said, honey, do you happen to say anything about that money? She said, yeah, he wired it down today. I said, wired it down? How much did he wire down? She said, $65,000. So the money became available Tuesday at 12 o'clock.
Renamed Solomon's Porch, the newly minted ministry center quickly became the hub of God's unfolding plan.
The strategic plan said we need a large house. Instead, God gives them a hospital, an empty hospital built by Italian stonemasons.
We have 4 floors, 89 rooms here, and so this is the first floor.
That building has seen a lot. It has seen the growth of Lynch.
It has seen babies born and people die, and a community grow and then go away. And now it is seeing the opportunity of more people to come back and fill its halls with noise and people that are caring about this place and what's happening. And I would think that this building is very, very happy, if buildings can be happy.
We really believe God can do the impossible, not only theoretically, but practically, where we are, not somewhere else, not in another part of the world, right here where we are.
You should just see the look on people's faces when Lonnie starts talking about this stuff, and he may as well be speaking some foreign language. They're like, what? Here?
But God's in the mix now. God's in the mix, and when God shows up, you'll know it.
Still, not many would have predicted the next knowing encounter would come at the side of a busy road, on horseback.
When I moved back to Lynch, I brought my horse along. And so I would ride her up and down beside the road, just exercising my horse. Every day I did that. And then all of a sudden, automobiles started pulling off, and kids would get out and sit on the hood and watch me exercise my horse. And I didn't think too much about that until one day there were 12 automobiles, 30 kids sitting on the hoods of the cars. And the Lord spoke to me that day and said, well, why don't you let them ride this horse? The most unlikely person, the most unlikely place, that's where God's going to show Himself.
As the rides and the crowds increased, so too did Lonnie's understanding of God's unfolding plan.
This guy came by, and his teenagers had been saved, and God had done a great thing in their life, and he came by and he said, I'm so impressed with what God's doing. I said, I want to help you. And so he comes back in a couple of weeks and said, I bought you a 20-acre farm today. So the Lord gave me 4 more horses, and I was riding a lot of kids and parents at this time too. Adults wanted to ride too. You can transform a culture by getting kids out of these hollers and telling them about Jesus and showing them a different lifestyle from what they've been accustomed to. And so I was sharing Jesus and people were getting saved.
Soon, the Lord provided a 12-stall barn and small riding arena. He also brought in a stellar couple, Drew and Leah Baldwin, to head up the budding equestrian ministry. Unforeseen at the time, to all but God that is, was the manner in which these horses would bring healing to children afflicted with autism.
And 3 years ago that we had a resource class that's brought their students over, and it was 12 students, and all of them, they were all autistic, and we were able to work with each one of them.
As word got out, parents with special needs children showed up from across a broad territory. They included politicians, judges, and a county sheriff.
God has drawn them to our doorstep.
And I've seen God move for so many.
And with that one barn with a small arena has now multiplied to 3 barns, a big hay barn. The arena is 200 by 150, and it's grown from that 1 horse to 26 horses.
These are the stables at Creekside Glen.
Everything that you would see here on our property has been initiated by God.
I think we found the simplicity of God's message in the cookie dough.
With the more recent addition of Shekinah Village, a property dotted with cabins, stores, a bunkhouse, veterinary clinic, and 2 beautiful lakes. The complex has tripled in size.
This is what we call Shekinah Village because the glory of the Lord is manifested here. And you can sense it when you come here. And I looked out over the lake, and the Lord showed me a gazebo. And I could see kids sitting around on that gazebo playing a guitar and telling what the Lord had done in their life this week. And we'll have sometimes 300 people underneath that eating. And then we transport them by wagon and tractor back and forth from the stables over to here.
Meanwhile, in October 2009, another resurrection story was unfolding in downtown Lynch. The reopening of Portal 31. However, this time, the voices echoing from its 2,400-foot depths would not be those of flesh and blood wage earners, but of animatronic miners and excited tourists. Billed as Kentucky's first exhibition coal mine, the multi-million-dollar project immediately began to attract visitors from across the country and from many foreign nations.
So far, all the people that have seen it, they think it's great.
This is not a myth. It wasn't set up. This was actually a coal mine, and there are people living here who actually work there.
It's an eye-opener to people that come.
It's one thing to come home and tell what you did. It's another thing for them to see what you did.
For many in the community, the portal's reopening, coming after 32 years of development, was another exquisitely timed expression of God's master plan.
He's orchestrated all of this. I believe that he kept the portal shut down until such a time as this, because now we're ready for it.
It's all in place. God's got this plan. It's all working.
It wasn't long before God's stirrings in Lynch began to raise eyebrows in the nation's capital.
There were 4 of us invited to Washington, D.C. to speak to the Appalachian Regional Commission.
It was an opportunity not to be missed, telling powerful commissioners how an even more powerful God was breathing new life into old bones.
At the conclusion of that, they said, well, this is just really amazing.
And if politicians love anything, it's a winner.
And they came to me and they said, well, how can we help you? And I said, I think that's the wrong question.
The government had been trying to help for the past 50 years, pouring billions of dollars into a bottomless well.
And I said, we're worse now than when we started. The unemployment, the illiteracy, the joblessness has all exponentially increased. I'm not here to ask you for money. In fact, the real question might be, how can we help you?
A determined enemy, however, will always counterattack. Despite the remarkable gains realized after the Rotary Park rally, by the mid-2000s, the war on coal was again hitting the community hard.
I read an article not long ago by somebody. They said the best thing that we could do in this area is basically shut it down and move away. Well, we don't feel that way.
There's always opposition to the work of God. Where it comes from, don't be surprised by that.
Darlene Hall, one of the principal catalysts behind the initial community rebound, suddenly found herself facing death a second time. And her son, Cody, had a front row seat.
And you just start hearing like a scream, like a murder. Someone's getting murdered in like a horror film. And I mute the TV, I'm like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. When I get out there, it's just like people wailing. It scared me. And I go back to the farthest back bedroom, and my uncle's laying in the floor with my mom doing CPR. And his eyes roll back in his head. He's looking gray. I'd never seen someone go from life to death, and glassy-eyed. And Mom is going ballistic. She's just, you know, it's her brother. And a very, very close one at that.
When you love deep, it hurts deep. And my family loves deep.
A few days later, relatives in for the funeral are overnighting at Darlene's house. But something isn't right.
The next morning I get woke up by my uncle shaking me, saying something's wrong with your mom. I picked her up and I was like, open the doors, open the car door, let's get her in there and go.
An MRI reveals problems. The emergency room doctor wants Darlene airlifted to the University Hospital in Lexington.
He informed us that she had had a tear in her carotid artery, which is, you know, one of the main arteries that supply blood to your brain, and it had formed a blood clot, and that blood clot broke off and went to her brain. So she had two big problems.
I was without oxygen for 4 hours.
And I just kneel down and, you know, tell her how much I love her. And nothing can happen to my mom. She's too good of a person. She's went through too much. Nothing's supposed to happen to her.
Doctors are worried that Darlene's brain is swelling. Unless they can get it under control and quickly, her prognosis is grim. The best hope is to remove part of her skull.
And so he was going through the different steps of what that entailed. Said he had to shave her head, and once I heard that, I was just, I was like, please don't tell me we have to shave my mom's head. She spends hundreds of dollars a month on hair care products. She will flip.
And then I wake up one morning and my head is shaved. Right when my hair was prettiest.
But God was not through with Darlene. And Darlene was not through with prayer.
When we got a purpose, when we got a reason to get up in the morning, then it changes everything. We don't see the end of this journey, but God has something in place that's going to be beautiful and wonderful, and I'm going to be part of it.
Prayer is not only the foundation for His work, prayer is the sustaining force for His work.
If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek my face.
It's God-inspired work, and I think that we're ready for God to lead us.
For many Lynch residents in the early 2000s, the decaying, rusting hulks of former glory years were a daily reminder of unfulfilled dreams.
The school had closed. The company store had closed years ago. The hotel had been torn down.
I mean, all these buildings were just rotting and decaying.
Some took refuge in the promise of Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future.
But before that, he says, seek the peace of the city. Pray for the city, for when that city prospers, you will prosper.
It is an admonition with a promise, but the promise is only activated when there is daily sensitivity to God's voice.
Lonnie could wake up in the middle of the night and say, God just told me this. I've got to remember to watch for that.
But the final outcome of God's working can sometimes take a while. A vivid illustration being the 12 to 14-year gap between David's anointing and the beginning of his kingly reign.
Well, what was God doing in that time? He was preparing everything so that when the godly King David took over, everything would be just right.
In Lonnie's case, a vision for a Christian coffee house was planted in 2001. 8 years later, however, nothing was stirring. But that didn't mean God was idle. Behind the scenes, a brilliant plan was emerging, and its centerpiece was the Old Miners Restaurant, perched atop Looney Creek.
The city actually came to Lonnie and said, would you like to have this building, and is there anything you could do with it?
Well,